will work. Here we go.
We can do the Facebook piece once we turn it over to Mr. Ford. We don't need to start that now.
All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us on this beautiful Saturday morning in Jacksonville, Florida. It's always nice to wake up with a little crispness in the air. Gets you excited about the day ahead, and we're really excited that you were able to join us. My name is Warren Buck. I'm the Director of Teacher Leadership at the Jacksonville Public Education Fund, and we're really excited to welcome you to the kickoff of the Teacher Leadership Initiative, a new initiative by the Jacksonville Public Education Fund designed to activate and empower teachers to make change in their own classes. We are really excited about the potential of this new initiative, and we are very, very proud of the teachers that are participating this year. I would be remiss if I didn't start us off by just naming that we have about 180 amazing teachers of the year that'll be joining us today. So we'd like everybody to give a little quiet celebration, some quiet clapping at your screen, just a little celebration of the teachers that are in the room, that are teachers of the year at their schools, and that are doing amazing things in their schools every single day. The process of Teacher of the Year happens first in our schools, where the staff and the administration identify amazing teachers. The staff then votes on the teacher finalists, and of those finalists, a final Teacher of the Year is named, and they are entered into the Jacksonville Duval County Public Schools Teacher of the Year competition. And we are just about ready to announce our final 15. I know there's a lot of very anxious teachers on the line today, so I'm not going to string this out any longer. They're going to find out on Monday who the semifinalists are, but we're really excited about this process, and we're really excited to offer this Teacher Leadership Initiative to all of our teachers of the year. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to the president of the Jacksonville Public Education Fund, Rachel Tutwiler-Fortune. It's on mute.
There we go. I unmuted myself. Thank you, Warren, and good morning, everyone. I just want to welcome you to the Teacher Leadership Summit. I am excited. I was just scrolling here through our list of attendees who have already signed in, and was excited to see so many familiar names, so many new names. I really wish we could all be together right now so that we could get to know each and every one of you. But you're here today because your colleagues believe in you, and we're here today because we believe in teachers. It has been an incredibly challenging year, but let me tell you, it gives me so much hope to see your faces. It's truly a testament to your commitment that you would take your Saturday to join us for what I know will be an incredible learning experience. And before I tell you about JPEF, I want to put the focus on really what needs to be the focus, and that's you. I know you're going to get a chance to know each other a little bit throughout the day, but I want to start that process right now. I'm just going to share a couple of amazing stories of amazing teachers who are here with us today. And I'd like you to come off mute and say hello if when I describe you and mention your name, that's you, as we'd love to just tell us a little bit more. There's a teacher in this initiative who wanted to create some positivity in her school. So she came up with the idea to greet her coworkers in the morning with a megaphone. Can you please introduce yourself, Ms. Lori Chinvekai? I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong.
And I just realized, Rachel, because we're in a webinar format, they may not be able to come off of mute.
Okay.
So I apologize, that was my fault. But if you are on the call, please say hello in the chat so we can say hello to you, the teacher who had the idea to greet her colleagues with a megaphone.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Hi.
Excellent. We're so glad you're here. We also have a teacher here with us who taught at the same school for 30 years, Miss Susan Seagraves. Would you please say hello in the chat as well, Miss Seagraves? She might be, hopefully she'll be able to greet us here in a second. We have another teacher here who created his own nation, Schumerica, to teach civics. Mr. Schumer, can you please say hello if you're here with us already? We have a teacher here with us as well, who is our inaugural Wolfberg Fellow. She is an amazing teacher. I was so excited to have the opportunity to actually meet her in person briefly yesterday when she was stopping by the JPEF office. We're excited that through that initiative, she is going to help create inclusive classrooms for all her students. Miss Alana, would you please say hello? And believe it or not, there is a mother and son duo who are both Teachers of the Year this year. If you're on right now, would you both please say hello? We're excited that we have a teacher on the call who has taught every age group from pre-K to college and who believes in the importance of showing her students, quote, Black excellence every day, and is just very committed to her students in that regard. Is Jalencia Singleton on the call? If so, please say hello in the chat. And then finally, we have a teacher who created a viral video showing her kids long division with more than 12 million views. Miss Ebry, would you please say hello in the chat as well? Every one of you is here because you have an amazing story to tell. That's just a couple of them. So I'm excited for you all to get to know each other through this process today and throughout the year. Before we dive in with the inspiring Mr. James Ford, who we are so excited to welcome back, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the Jacksonville Public Education Fund and why we exist here in Duval County. The Jacksonville Public Education Fund is an independent think and do tank that believes in the potential of all students. We work tirelessly to close the opportunity gap for low-income students and students of color. We convene educators, school system leaders, and the community to help pilot and scale evidence-based solutions that advance school quality in our public schools. Why do we exist? It's because even though our schools have made such tremendous progress, we know the work is not done, especially for students of color and students from low-income families. We describe and know this challenge as the opportunity gap. And just a few data points to share here, which I know each and every one of you knows very well to ground us in what this means for our beautiful city. Peer-reviewed research shows that the unintentional discrimination, which is known as implicit bias, which I know you'll talk a lot about here today, can lead to Black boys as young as 4 years old facing harsher discipline than white children. In Duval County, 44% of students in our public schools are Black, yet they make up 73% of out-of-school suspension. That's based on Florida Department of Education data from 2019 school year. Research also shows that representation in the teaching force has an impact on students. One study shows that Black boys were 29% less likely to drop out of high school when they had at least one Black teacher in elementary school. In Duval County, which mirrors those national trends, students of color represent 66% of learners, while teachers of color only represent 32% of our instructors. Title I elementary schools, which have a larger proportion of students living in poverty, are less likely to have an A or B grade in Duval County. 92% of non-Title I elementary schools versus 40% of Title I elementary schools have those grades. So we have to ask ourselves, how can we help? We're here to support you in making a difference for your students. We're here to re-energize you, to celebrate you, to provide you with resources. At JPEF, we aspire to inspire education leaders and partners to see the possibilities through our research. And by the way, by education leaders, we mean you, the educators who are leading in our schools each and every day. We aim to connect education leaders to learn from each other and from national experts, which is the brilliance of this convening today. We convene education leaders and partners to develop common understanding of the gaps and collectively implement solutions. And as we do those things, we provide material support where usually there are just greater demands. This year, thanks to the leadership of our own Warren Buck, JPEF was able to help catalyze more than $50,000 in classroom grants for Duval County teachers, helping you buy headphones for students, engaging learning materials, individual supplies that students needed as they were making the transition to virtual or back to brick and mortar. We know as a city, a society that puts so much responsibility on your shoulders, we have a part to play here at JPEF to help lighten that burden. The Teacher Leadership Initiative, which is what brings us together today, is one of the phenomenal examples of how JPEF brings solutions to schools. And I'm going to thank Warren for his vision around that work and his leadership and incredible work ethic in bringing it to fruition, especially in this year of all years. We're so excited today to bring in some of our leading education partners, including the University of North Florida, Hope Street, and TNTP, convening leading education partners and experts with Duval County's leading teachers. At JPEF, we want to be a resource to you and to all teachers. So please keep in touch with us and help us spread the word to your teaching colleagues. We encourage you, if you're not already, to follow us on social media. That's at JAXPEF at JaxPEF. Visit our website to sign up for our newsletter. We provide in our newsletter lots of great resources and announcements about grants and fellowships. And you can do that at our website, www.jaxpef.org. Thank you all so much again for taking the time to be here with us. I hope you enjoy yourselves, and I'm so excited to get to know you through this process. Warren.
Thanks, Rachel. Really excited about the potential of this, and I'm really excited about all the positive things that we're seeing in the chat and all the great relationships that are already building with our teachers. So with that, I would like to welcome a recent North Carolina Teacher of the Year who has become one of the leading educational equity experts in America. He spoke here a couple of years ago and really brought down the house. So we were really excited for this opportunity to bring back Mr. Ford to talk to us again, as we're really grounding this practice of TLI, Teacher Leadership Initiative, in inquiry, which is inherently something that is going to lead to more equitable outcomes for our students. So without any further ado, let me turn this over to Mr. James Ford.
Thank you so much, Warren. I appreciate, again, the invitation from JPEF. You all are an amazing organization, doing amazing work, and I'm grateful to have been included in this opportunity to work with so many amazing educators, award-winning educators, and so thank you for that. I do think I may need permissions to share the screen here as I'm trying to get on, but allow me to set things up by saying that the mission that you have articulated for JPEF, the data that you just so eloquently talked about is precisely what I think we need to be focusing on all the time, but especially today in this environment that we find ourselves. And so with that in mind, I'll be discussing this notion of the imperative of equity. And I really want us to take a moment to just situate and think about where we're at. Just take a second to drink in, 2020 and all of its 2020-ness. All that it is and all that it has not been, all of the expectations we have had and all of how they have either exceeded or been failed. But most particularly, how it has impacted our field, because I want us to invite that context into this room and into this space. Just as a sort of pre-assessment, I'm going to put three statements up here, and I want you to look at each of these statements. And they're generally pretty vanilla, pretty bland and non-controversial statements, but I want to challenge you just to look at these and to think about them critically and see if, even if you've heard them before, if you might look at them a little bit differently and see something that may be potentially problematic by any of these statements. And so I'll kind of read them out loud. But the first statement is, you can do anything if you just put your mind to it. Okay. We've heard this a million times. Can't be anything wrong with that, right? How about this one? This is actually a lyric, right? I'm proud to be an American where at least I know I'm free, right? America, nation of immigrants. Okay. And the reason why I want you to think critically about these is because these are things that don't come across as having any particularly controversial sentiments, any controversial bias, but would we tell English language learners who are having difficulty accessing the text that, well, you can just do anything if you just put your mind to it? Would that make sense in that context, right? Would we be speaking to that particular set of needs if we offered that as a rebuttal or as an encouragement for an emerging bilingual student? Proud to be an American where at least I know I'm free. Given the events that we've seen over the past year, right? Individuals who are deliberately having their rights violated, are they seen in that statement? Do we see them, or is that something that erases their experience? America, nation of immigrants, right? I'll use myself as an African American in this instance, right? The descendant of kidnapped and enslaved African folk. Where am I in that statement? Right. And I put these up here to show how things that are seemingly, benign and innocuous can oftentimes perpetuate inequities even without us knowing it. And there's going to be ways that we're going to identify that shows up in our school and our classroom practices as well. So I'm going to submit to y'all that teaching is inherently political. Typically, I would forward this to you all as a question and ask you, is teaching political, apolitical? But like I said, given 2020, we're just gonna be a little more forward and apply a little more pressure here, and just let you know that, in my opinion, right, I'm gonna advance the idea that teaching is inherently political. On a multitude of different levels, not just what we're teaching, but where we're teaching, who goes to that school, how monies are allocated to that school, how schools are resourced, what ethnic and racial populations are at that school, who are the teachers, how they are assigned. All of that is inherently decided through a political process. But certainly what we teach kids and the way we go about that is wrangled over. It's contested and fought over because narratives are important. And the populations that are influenced by what we teach and what those populations are empowered or disempowered from doing becomes inherently political, because politics is about the distribution of power at its core level. And when I say that teaching is political, I mean, you could take my word for it, or you could just ask Socrates, right? For all my social studies teachers out there. Socrates, who met his fate being forced to drink hemlock poison because he was accused of radicalizing the youth, right? Corrupting the youth. And so when you think about that, this millenniums old tradition of teaching, of being an instructor, this has always been controversial. And I would say our present modern politics, we've tried to, as a profession, shy away from that. But I want to submit to y'all, there's no way to do that, right? If we're going to do this right, we got to honor that teaching is inherently political. Now, it is not partisan, right? Because I don't get into partisan politics like that. I'm unaffiliated and frankly don't care. But I want to disabuse us of this notion that what we do has no political impact. It's hugely political. So we don't have to look at examples from 2,000 years ago. We can just look at modern examples to see that what we do and the way we go about it draws the attention of frankly the highest members of our of office, right? The commander in chief himself has issued orders, right? Executive orders, and they tried to crack down on particular ways of teaching. And trainings, right? Even us engaging in these discussions right now by some spheres of influence could be seen as controversial, could be seen as pushing up against power structures. And so we need to acknowledge that, what we do and the way that we do it, people are watching and they got opinions about it. And so what does that call us to do? What should that compel us to do? Should it compel us to shy away, to be nervous, to try to tiptoe around the things that we know are of crucial importance to our kids and to society? Or do we fully acknowledge this environment, um, and just confront it, right? And hold fidelity to our craft and stand up and defend this centuries old institution that we know is really about emancipating and liberating the minds of individuals so that they can be their fullest selves. I submit to y'all that we're engaged in a struggle right now. We're in a struggle right now. And people don't look at it this way, but our profession is actually on the front line of that struggle. Okay. And so hopefully over the time today, I can talk to you about what I think that struggle looks like, the extended history of that struggle, and where we need to go from here. I want you to take a moment though, when I talk about equity, and I almost kind of am beginning to hate the word equity, even though I know what it means, because it's being tossed to and fro, right? And it's kind of like anything else. You chew it long enough, like a piece of gum, and it starts to lose its flavor. But this is the way that I set up equity. I think about equity as a pair of glasses, right? And for anyone who are glasses wearers or you wear contacts, I want you to think about what those glasses do for you. And if I was to ask you, you would probably say, well, they help me to see. And the truth of the matter is, so long as you have functioning eyes, you probably can already see without glasses, even if you can't see very well. What glasses likely do, though, is they likely help you to see clearer. They likely help you to bring things into focus that you formerly could not see. They likely help you to bring things into definition based upon your own particular vision, right? Um, yeah, I mean that's kind of the way I want you to frame equity. Okay, equity as a pair of glasses that you put on. You can see without them, but there'll be certain things you can't see very well because you can't see them through these particular lenses and through these frames. I frame everything in power and privilege. And so everything we look at, we need to be understanding of how is power showing up, right? How is power, the ability to influence decisions, right? Influence the environment, uh, for or with or against individuals' will. Right? How is that manifesting itself, and the privileges, the advantages that are accrued as a result of that? How is that showing up in our context? And then what are the lenses that we pop in there? Are we looking through the lenses of race? I'd submit to you that you have to see race, right? We know that it's kind of considered a noble thing to say things. Well, I don't see race. I mean, I was so happy to hear from the outset, that the JPEF is committed to understanding and looking at students of color. Because if you can't see race, you can't see racism, which becomes a problem, right? Which actually makes us complicit. Class, right? Talking about low income students, right? Whether you see it or not, or whether you care about it or not, I guarantee it's showing up in outcomes. And the data that was offered and recited, I mean, just makes that case even further. It's particularly in a COVID environment, right? We're seeing that in ways that we hadn't seen prior to, or ways that we knew but weren't as well defined, right? Gender, right? Gender expression, right? For females and males and folks who are non-binary, right? Who don't show up in that spectrum, right? And sexual orientation. We could pop all sorts of lenses in there, but I'd submit to you that we need to be very careful to always see through these lenses, because there's going to be populations that need us to see them and need us to respond to their diverse and wide-ranging needs. Because to me, I've always viewed school as this picture right here. Whenever I got a class roster at the beginning of the school year, to me, it just looked like this, right? A range of various puzzle pieces, who I, as the instructor, was tasked with figuring out how to fit together in a way that makes a coherent picture, right? But unlike other puzzles, though, where you typically get a box where you can kind of look at a reference image, right? Something to refer back to. In schools, you don't get a box. In fact, it's dependent on the philosophy of the educator to assume that these pieces actually do fit together. And based on that assumption, to find a way to match those pieces. And these pieces vary. They're different colors, different shades, different shapes. Some of them are more well worn, right? Some of them are new that kind of pop right in place. Some are more opaque. You don't really know if they're an edge piece or a middle piece, part of a picture or border, but you have to move forward with the assumption that they do fit together. And it's your job, our job, to make sure that in this field, every piece has its place, to make sure that every piece knows that it fits, even if it takes us a while to figure that out. Because this is the new America, right? This is what these quote unquote pieces look like now, right? An America that fits within the globalized economy, right? With an increasing foreign-born population, an America that has set itself out as a beacon, right? As a light, and has frequently referred to ourselves as the greatest country in the world. And so it should be no surprise to us then that lots of people would like to live in the greatest country in the world. And so what that leads to is, huge populations of folks of color, linguistically diverse, culturally diverse student populations. But are we committed in our field to making sure that all of these pieces fit? Are we going to see them through the lenses of our equity glasses? Or do we go about treating them and seeing them through a system that, frankly, when it was constructed, did not have them in mind? Okay. And so the ways we do or don't do that or respond make good or negate our imperative of equity. And that's the argument I'm essentially making here. And for being honest, lots of folks are upset about this changing picture of America. That if we're being we're keeping it real here, right? It's 2020. This is what's causing a lot of the political discourse right now, right? This eminent fact, right? And so how we feel about that even is going to be hugely important, because we know that there's a ton of things, right, that influence education outcomes. You heard the data recited, right? Race, income, language proficiency, access to pre-K, family composition. Come on now. I mean, with COVID-19, what else could you put on here? And the sort of virtual distance learning, access to broadband, right? In North Carolina, there are places in our state where we just don't have the infrastructure, right? It's not a matter of getting a hotspot. There aren't the towers. So putting a device in your hand doesn't necessarily do anything, right? So all of these things influence education. So the equity imperative says we don't have the ability to ignore these things because they actually directly correlate to our outcomes, right? And furthermore, going upstream, it's not just the outcomes, it's the opportunity, right? And so I'm happy to hear the correct phrasing, opportunity gaps. Because that's really what's happening here, right? Achievement gap assumes that all students have the same starting place. And we know that without trying to sound anti-American, we just know that that's not, every student isn't situated. Their communities aren't situated in the same place. And being honest about that allows us to properly respond to that lived reality and experience. I don't usually go around quoting your senator, Marco Rubio. We have political differences, but I always appreciated this particular statement that he lodged in the 2016 presidential debate when he was still a candidate. He said, "I'm not interested in being politically correct." And that's important because I want to offer y'all a couple of tools and ammunition to push up against the environment, because there's going to be a backlash as we continue to talk about this stuff. Folks are going to tell you, oh, this is, social justice warrior stuff. This is, communist propaganda. This is, just being honest. This is not about PC culture, any of that. Like Marco Rubio, I'm not interested in being politically correct, but I am interested in, I put here factually, in being factually correct. Right. And so we can make this a nonpartisan thing and just pull the rug out under this argument and say, this is not about being politically correct. It's about being correct. These are the facts, right? And the facts don't have feelings, right? The facts don't have feelings. It's not me, it's math, right? We're just talking about what is in fact true. And despite this environment, facts still matter. right? The currency of facts and truth still matter. In the end, this is not about whether one belongs to the Republican Party or whether they identify as politically conservative. This is not about whether one belongs to the Democratic Party and whether they identify as liberal, or whether one identifies as libertarian or whether one identifies as more of a leftist. This is about a concept called democratic humanism. And it really is about these two things. When we start talking about equity, we're talking about things that are transcendent, that go beyond any of those things that I just talked about, right? Because at the end of the day, right, and civics teachers and social studies teachers can appreciate here, what I hope we can all agree upon is this idea of democracy, of literally the Greek word democracy comes from demokratia, is about people power, right? So when folks are out in the streets, right, and they're talking about power to the people, that's a chant for democracy. That's not a political chant. When we're talking about the ability for every vote to be counted, when we're talking about everybody being able to have the same rights and being able to have the same, that's power. That's democracy. That's power sharing, right? These things aren't about a particular political platform or an agenda. These are things that are foundational to the concept of America. And when you start really speaking and acting on this equity imperative, you have to be able to offer a rebuttal when folks try to hit you with the stigmas and say, nah, this isn't about that. It's about democracy. And I thought that was something that we all shared as Americans, right? But beyond that, it's about humanism. Yeah. And I'm not talking about like secular humanism as like a body or beliefs. I'm talking about the idea that every individual, every human being should be able to make full human development, right? That they should be able to capitalize and actualize on all their gifts and all their talents and all their potential. And this concept of democratic humanism, that everyone, right, regardless of who they are, should be able to make their full human potential, that education is a key facilitator in that process. Everyone should be able to agree upon that. And when we offer it that way, we cut through the nonsense. Not that everyone will agree, but this ought to be the way that we respond. It's about core values as a nation. And so equity is that imperative. It's outside of our Supreme Court. Equal justice under law, right? This idea of fairness, that this is a principle that's foundational to our democratic republic, right? This is not this shouldn't be a partisan or political thing. This is American stuff, right? This is in our values. It's in the preamble of our Constitution, right? To form a more perfect union, to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, promote the general welfare, for the blessings of our liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Like we got to start standing up and being willing to push back and challenge folks when they tell us that's not what education is supposed to be. Yes, it is. You've misunderstood, right, the field that we belong to, right? And so allow me to re-educate you, allow us to reintroduce ourselves, if you will. And even as we think about the civil unrest that's happened here, and the struggle that's happened, we've been here before, y'all. As we are constantly bombarded with images, primarily of riots and folks asking, what's going on? Why all the protests? And then folks focusing on the property damage as well. Why is that happening? Why are people tearing up there? I want to submit to y'all, again, as a history teacher here, that we've already asked these questions. And furthermore, we not only asked the questions, but we found the answers. And we've actually worked diligently on not knowing and not acknowledging our truth. So I'm going to play for you 3.5 minute clip from this Kerner Commission report that talks about the mission or the objective of figuring out how and why is there civil unrest and what was the ultimate root cause.
Starting from 65 until 68, there were riots in Black communities in more than 100 cities across the nation.
This is Newark, New Jersey in 1967. Some of you probably lived through the riots in your cities, but for those who didn't, this video from Newark looks like scenes from a foreign war where the military is fighting in the streets of a city. Truckloads of men in military uniforms are driving through. And riots were happening in cities all over the country. Los Angeles, Chicago, Cleveland, San Francisco, Tampa, Buffalo, Atlanta, Boston, Omaha, Waukegan, Detroit, Durham, Memphis, Milwaukee, Minneapolis.
I can't imagine this happening in dozens of cities every year for 3 years. Tanks rolling through American cities. You have combat troops on American cities, buildings on fire.
President Johnson appointed a commission known as the Kerner Commission, Republicans and Democrats, to look into the riots, which were freaking out the entire country, no surprise. In debates, some members of Congress argued that civil rights legislation, including a housing law, would reward and encourage rioting. The Kerner Commission's report came out while Congress was debating a fair housing bill for the third time after it had failed to pass twice before. The report was published as a paperback book. I'm looking down at a copy right now, and it's got 3 questions emblazoned on the front. These are the questions President Johnson had publicly asked the commission to address. What happened? Why did it happen? What can be done?
It sold something like 2 million copies when it first came out. So Americans were actually really interested in this report. It was definitely a bestseller, and back then it was certainly a bestseller. But you have to understand, like, there had been 4 years of rioting in cities all across the country. And so I think many Americans were anxious to read an assessment of why this was.
The report is more than 600 pages, but its conclusion was simple and has been famously and repeatedly quoted since. Quote, "Our nation is moving toward 2 societies, one black and one white, separate and unequal." The commissioners had spent months going to the cities, looking at data, interviewing people, residents, police, politicians, and they concluded that there was one central driving force behind the riots. This is Nicole quoting from the book. She's got her own copy.
Segregation and poverty have created in the racial ghetto a destructive environment totally unknown to most white Americans. What white Americans have never fully understood, but what the Negro can never forget, is that white society is deeply implicated in the ghetto. White institutions created it, white institutions maintain it, and white society condones it. So I think people tend to think that generally people live like they do. And I think that they took great pains to say, we went into these communities.
We, the commission.
Exactly, the commission. We're like you. You know, we're a largely white male group. And we went into those communities and we found like something, that we did not imagine.
I want you to hold those quotes in your mind and to remember the conclusions that they found. How does this implicate our field? Because you have to understand that, you know, our institution has always reflected society, y'all. They can't be untethered, rather. There's never been equity. In fact, there's always been inequity, right? And that's important for us to understand as we attempt to cure this scourge in our field. From the times where it was illegal for an enslaved person to read or write in our country, to the times when the very notion of educating women and girls was considered controversial, right? It was considered disruptive to the traditional family, right? And emasculating to men. Like, people were really publishing articles on this nonsense, to the point when we were running separate and unequal school systems and attempting to desegregate them, and there was huge backlash. There has never been equity. So we have our hands full as we now set about the task of equalizing educational opportunities. This is relatively unprecedented. We know that our institution is not even that old, education, right? And that in the foundational colonial period of America, that education, compulsory education, didn't exist. And in fact, if you got education at all, it was because you belonged to the ruling class, right? If you had money, right, your parents, hear me now, could pay for a tutor. Could pay for someone to come to your house to instruct you, right? You got exposed to literacy and numeracy. You got exposed to the humanities, Plato, Aristotle, playing violin, etc. You were being groomed for leadership. But if you didn't have money, right, You unfortunately were you weren't exposed to any of that. In fact, you were just subsisting. You were forced to work. Does that sound similar to our present environment, particularly with virtual learning? I wonder. I'm just asking questions. There have been equity-based reforms that have tried to cure this, and many of them came out of the civil rights era. It's important to know. Elementary and Secondary Education Act comes out of the Civil Rights Act, right? We know about Title I that attempts to respond to that. We know about the Bilingual Education Act and the Lau remedies. We know about Title IX that is attempted to respond to these things. Plyler versus Doe, Supreme Court case, which says that regardless how students come to us, their immigration status, they are entitled to a public education. Many of us don't know that. To the McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Act, which offers federal interventions for our homeless students, right? So there have been acknowledgments along the way, right? Pluses, but we still haven't closed those opportunity gaps. So we're not quite there. We're not there yet. But what we're dealing with is in fact a human rights issue. Yeah, we educators are involved in the human rights struggle. That is not hyperbole, right? That is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, right? Article 26, which again says everyone has the right to an education. And when we talk about humanism, you see again, number 2, shall be directed to the full development of the human personality. Full human development, right? That's what we're talking about here, right? We're not talking about partisan, we're talking about human rights. And we ought to situate our struggle in that way when we talk about it from here on out. I want to play for you a video which again explains the environment that we're in right now. And I want you to think about, and I have to apologize for some of the language here, you're gonna hear the N-word, etc. But again, we're keeping it real. But Tupac and all of his brilliance. Think about the Kerner Commission report. Think about the present environment we're in, and listen to what Tupac is saying here in this 2 minutes.
Yes, my raps are filled with rage.
One of these days, we gotta bust back for the homies.
You have to be logical. If I know that in this hotel room they have food every day, and I'm knocking on the door every day to eat, and they open the door, let me see the party, let me see like them throwing salami all over just like throwing food around. But they're telling me there's no food in here. You know what I'm saying? Every day. I'm standing outside trying to sing my way in. You know what I'm saying? We are hungry, please let us in. We are hungry, please let us in. After about a week, that song is going to change to, we hungry, we need some food. After 2-3 weeks, it's like, give me all the food, breaking out the door. And after a year, you just like, you know what I'm saying? I'm picking the lock, coming through the door, blasting, you know what I'm saying? It's like you hungry, you reached your level, you don't want any more. We asked 10 years ago. We was asking with the Panthers. We was asking with them, with civil rights movement. We was asking, now those people that were asking, they're all dead and in jail. So now what do you think we're gonna do? Ask?
How many of y'all have brilliant students like Tupac in your classrooms, right? And how just succinctly and expertly he broke down like social movements, right? Like in that moment. Right. So think about where we're at. Review this year. We remember this. We remember this. I hope we remember this. Hopefully y'all remember this as well. Amy Cooper called the police on the Central Park bird watcher when she was in, one violating the rules. And how many Amy Coopers do we have in our schools who we talked about implicit bias, right? Who over discipline, over suspend kids of color for no. I'm just saying, right? Remember this. So this is where we find ourselves now. Yeah. We are engaged in what has categorically been documented. This is the longest, broadest social movement in the history of the United States at this point. More even than the civil rights movement. It's not even just an American movement, it has become a global movement. So the rest of the world is paying attention to what we're doing here. in the United States. And y'all, whether you think of yourselves that way, are on the front lines. So every system we see is designed to achieve whatever it is achieving. And this is from Peter Senge, systems thinker. And so as educators, we got to figure out, how do we disrupt this system? All the statistics we talked about, and all the negative creation of inequities and opportunity gaps, how do we disrupt that? We do that a couple of ways. One is, I want to make the argument that we need to begin to adopt a critical consciousness. Now, appropriately, I was not introduced to this author or this book until a former student gave it to me. Never exposed to this concept in all of my educator prep. But a former student who actually was a struggling student who I used to stay on in my class and always challenging him, transferred to a different school, graduated, and then showed up outside my classroom one day after school. Hey, Mr. Ford, I graduated. I was like, oh, that's great. And we kept in contact. And he said, you ever read this book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed? I said, no. He said, you need to check that out. Book changed my life. I was angry that I'd never heard about it. In it, this concept of conscientization is introduced by the author Paulo Freire, Brazilian popular educator. So, educator of the population. He introduces this concept of education as a practice of freedom, and using our discourse, using our craft, using our pedagogy and our instructional techniques as a way of critiquing society, right? Exposing the political and social contradictions. And what's funny is, I was already doing this in my classroom. I just never knew what it was called. Some of y'all, many of y'all, I'm sure, are already doing this, right? But it's about developing critical consciousness. So we can't be afraid to expose and use our subject matter to expose the fissures and the cracks of our society. That does not make us unpatriotic. It does not make us communists. It does not make us social justice warriors. It makes us American, right? But an education that doesn't apply to the world that the young people live in, it doesn't allow them to look at it and say, hey, what's wrong, but also what's right? And where are the contradictions between what we say and what we do? And what's our responsibility as citizens to make that right? Right? Like developing a critical consciousness that asks questions, right? And where we are co-investigators, right? With our students, disrupting the top-down relationship. Sometimes we're the teacher, sometimes we're the students. And as I mentioned, it was the student who introduced me to this text. And so that's critical consciousness, that's critical pedagogy. Adopting more critical pedagogy is what we need to do in this environment, is the argument that I'm making. This has been talked about quite a bit, critical race theory. And how many of the people talking about it even know what this is? Right? So critics of some critical theory have said that it doesn't talk enough or expose enough the concept of race and that construct and how it's been used initially legally, and then eventually individuals like Gloria Ladson-Billings, queen mother of culturally responsive teaching, introduced it into the field of education. Understanding how race and racism operate expertly in our society. The major tenets, right? The permanence of racism and white supremacy. When we talk about that, we're talking about the structural, systemic nature of racism that is embedded in all of our institutions. Whiteness as property, right? Which can be translated to this notion of white privilege. Again, power and privilege. How does white supremacy translate into privileges? We're almost like a property right. We defend that, right? Interest convergence. How do we make progress, right? When different racial and ethnic groups see their shared destinies and are able to identify intersections, that's when progress is made. Telling counter stories that focus on the assets of our students and not only the deficits, right? And being deliberately race conscious all the time. Yeah, I submit to you that we need a little more critical race theory. And then, of course, Dr. Eduardo Bonilla Silva, who very expertly puts his finger on the pulse of what's happening in America today, which is we're experiencing what he calls colorblind racism, or racism without racists, so to speak, because nobody's racist, right? Now nobody is, right? And yet racism keeps being perpetuated. And so he says that happens four major ways, right? Even the way we talk about it. And this is so good if you get a chance to read this, because the tools that we need as educators, again, to pull the air, let the air out of arguments and defend our profession is important. Abstract liberalism that always focuses on saying and doing oh yeah, everybody should be able to do the right things, and in America everybody should have opportunity, and etc. All these lofty things, but when it translates to actual concrete decisions at the school level, targeted interventions that impact certain groups, it's we can't do that. That wouldn't be fair, or no, that's yeah, I believe it's not right that anybody should be suspended more than anybody else, but I mean targeting and restorative justice programs to lower the number of Black and brown kids, I mean that's not fair. It's abstract liberalism. It's not real. Naturalization, it talks about the inequities we see as if they are a force of nature, as if they're meant to be that way. Well, it's no wonder kids of color are suspended more than other kids. They're worse by nature. They don't know how to behave, right? These sort of things, or they're no wonder their GPAs and scores are lower. I mean, come on, some kids just aren't as bright. This naturalization argument is very dangerous. Cultural racism. If people would just learn how to speak English, that'd be, that's, or maybe if their families cared, right? Maybe if they valued education. I mean, if they got a backwards culture. We hear all these tropes, minimization. You know what? Slavery ended 1,000,000 years ago. Why are we still talking about that? Can't we just move forward? And these are the sort of things that he's talking about. And if as I'm saying these, I'm hoping you can hear even colleagues maybe, who you hear say these sort of things, right? And what it allows is racism, colorblind racism, to persist. We see statements like this, right? And this is actually from the text, where she's critiquing, she's asked about targeted interventions like affirmative action. And she says things like, a lot of bad things happen to a lot of people. You can't just sit there and dwell on it. I mean, you don't want to wallow in it. What happened to them a long time ago. I think you need to move on and try to put that behind you. She's talking about Black people like wallowing in and discussing, things that happened to them a long time ago. This is an actual example of the things Eduardo Bonilla Silva talks about. But furthermore, I'm gonna play you a video now that you have your equity glasses on, and now that you are beginning to look through the lens of those various lenses. I want you to hear now that we're engaging in critical pedagogy and critical consciousness, things ought to sound different to you. So I'm going to test that with this brief little 2-minute video here. And this is a lady who is discussing her opposition to affordable housing being built in her neighborhood. Okay. Again, just hear all the things that I talked about before: equity lenses, critical consciousness, racism without racism. I want you to listen now to what you hear.
Some residents voice concerns about traffic, others about overcrowding in their schools.
Hi, nice to meet you.
And some were worried about having low-income housing in their neighborhood.
Why did you pick this spot?
Nicole Humphrey is a local opponent of the development.
What is your concern when it comes to Section 8 and low income?
The lifestyle, I feel like, that goes with Section 8 is usually working single moms, or people who are struggling to keep their heads above water. And it's not, I feel so bad saying that, but it's not, it's just not people who are, I guess, of the same class as us, which sounds bad, but I don't mean that in a bad way.
Some people would say, look, they maybe have not had the opportunities that their kids are not going to have the opportunities that your kids are going to have in this neighborhood.
Right.
Can they share in that?
The problem with that is I hear a lot of the unfair of, we haven't been given this or not that, or we haven't been afforded things that you might have been afforded. I don't look at multimillionaires and think, why don't I have a yacht? Why don't I have a private jet? It's a mindset, I feel like.
Do you think that you maybe are stereotyping the folks?
Oh, I totally am, 100%. It's not, it works both ways. I'm definitely not a racist and I'm not bigot, but I think I hold a little bit of a stigma against people who are different. We don't want nomads. We don't want people who don't have roots. I just don't want that to be what my community is about.
All right, preparing to close here. She really struggled to articulate the logic of her arguments, and I would argue that that's a feature of what we're seeing a lot right now, right? The inability to compute facts, right, in alignment with our preconceived notions and positions, and we have a responsibility in that, y'all, as educators, right? You know, for instance, we know that students are having trouble, even, and adults are telling fake news from real news, right? There was a study, a Stanford study, that found that most middle school students can't tell native ads from articles on social media. Most high school students accept stuff they see in photographs without verifying them. Students couldn't tell fake news source from a real one on Facebook. And even Stanford students couldn't identify the difference between mainstream and fringe, a mainstream and fringe source, right? A legitimate source and a source that's like, should you critique that? And I mean, so again, we got work. This is our field. So as we prepare to close, I just want to leave y'all kind of with this theory of change and then some suggestions. This is how we change it. No matter what we say, this equity journey begins with ourselves. And that's what each of y'all are doing. That's why you're here. That's why you're embracing this opportunity, this learning opportunity today, because you're going to start with the self. Doing everything you can to learn, immerse yourself, become proficient at, and change your own mindsets, and being willing to be self-reflective and critique your own positions on stuff. That's the work. From there, we change our system. In this case, our system is our school system. And that can be your actual school or the school system that you're in Duval County, right? That's how it has to work. That's the order of operations. And then from there, when we change our institution, then we change society. And in the long range, in the next 20 years, hopefully we make better human beings than the ones we produced and that we're seeing right now, the next generation, because we sit in a very interesting and influential position to help change that trajectory. And I'll leave you with these right here. Recognize context is everything. We can't divorce our instruction, our approach to this work. We're going to disrupt this. We need to understand the stories, the lived experiences of our students. Build a narrative, even for yourself. Understand for yourself why you're doing this. What's the overarching, again, with the equity piece, you got to be able to articulate that, because you're going to have to defend your field and environments right now. Make our instruction relevant. Pull from, teach from multiple perspectives. Pull from the lives and experiences of our students. Tap into their assets, their funds of knowledge. Use that. Teach through culture, not just to culture. Focus on skill development, y'all. More than ever, we need literacy. We need argumentation. We need the ability to construct a coherent argument, disrupt circular logic, right? We need critical thinking. We need all of that. Focus on skill development, make it central to what you're doing. Consult available scholarship. There are folks who have researched this stuff already. We got to pull on this as we participate. And then we got to live this. This has to be who we are. Okay. It can't just be what we do when we punch a clock. It's got to be something we live on a daily basis. And with that, I'll leave my contact information up there for anyone who wants to reach out to me. But what I want to thank y'all for being attentive for the last 45 minutes.
Wow, thank you very much, Mr. Ford. I think I speak for all of us when I say that was an absolutely amazing presentation, and just could not be a better start to the work that we're about to endeavor to undertake. I keep coming back to that, systems achieve the results that they're designed to achieve. And that is amazingly powerful, and it gets me very fired up about the opportunity that we have. So thank you. I hope you're able to see the chat and all the thanks and all the praise that you're receiving there. It is very well deserved. We look forward to continuing to work with you and to you hopping over to our Q&A. So for those of you that are in the Teacher Leadership Initiative, you're going to transition over there. We're going to get started about 5 minutes from now. I'll put the link in the chat. Those of you that are not in the Teacher Leadership Initiative, but would like to have a Q&A session with Mr. Ford, conducted by our own Coretta Hill, please go ahead and follow the link that we gave you, or that we gave you either in the email or that we are also putting in the chat. You'll see a link and a password that you'll need to copy and paste. So both of those will get kicked off in just a few minutes. Thank you all very much for being so attentive. The chat was very, very interesting to watch. I got a lot of notes that I'm anxious to share with everybody. So thank you very much. We're going to wrap up this meeting and then TLI into your TLI link, and then the Q&A. Please join Mr. Ford over there. Thank you all very much.